Arvind Anandam, and I work for C2B2 Consulting, which is a leading independent middleware consultancy. C2B2 has been doing a series of webinars on GlassFish. Just to give you a brief history, there was 3 parts previous to this, which was getting started, and then there was a part on high availability, and then followed by a part on operational monitoring. And today is the last and the final part of the series, which I'll be talking about is migrating to GlassFish. Today's agenda, I've divided this webinar into a 2-part series. Part 1, we'll be talking about migrating from previous versions of GlassFish to GlassFish Server 4.0. And part 2, we'll be talking about migrating from a totally different application server to GlassFish. Just to give you a brief introduction on GlassFish application server. GlassFish is an open source application server by Oracle. It was originally from Sun Microsystems. It is a reference implementation for Java EE. So basically, it's the first place where you get to try new things and new features of the new Java EE versions. GlassFish 4.0 is the reference implementation for Java EE 7. And in addition to the open source edition of the GlassFish server, there is also a commercial edition by Oracle, which is called the Oracle GlassFish server. So if you want product support or quick bug fixes, then probably that is the edition that you need to go for. What's new in GlassFish 4? Well, because it's a reference implementation for Java EE 7, anything that's new in Java EE 7 is new in GlassFish 4. So that includes JMS 2.0, JAX-RS 2.0, JR API for WebSocket, and things like that. Important thing that I have to say at this point of time is Oracle have made it very clear that because this is a reference implementation of Java EE 7, and that is the main focus of this release, all the other features that is, say, clustering and scalability and high availability, upgrade, etc., are not the primary focus of this release. What this means is those features will work, but because they were already part of it in the previous versions. So you could still find some incompatibilities when it comes to the new Java EE 7 features. So moving on and diving further into our webinar, part 1 is migrating from previous versions of GlassFish to GlassFish Server 4.0. So what we're going to be looking at is what are the tools that are available to us to carry out this migration process, and what are the steps involved with reference to each tool that we choose. So there are 2 different upgrade paths that you could use for migrating from one version to another in GlassFish. Part 1 is called the side-by-side upgrade. As the name suggests, it means that you could have two versions of different installations running side by side. So it means the new GlassFish server release is installed in a directory which is different to the release that which you're upgrading from. So what you do is you basically perform a basic installation of the GlassFish Server 4 in a location other than the one that is being used by the older product. And then you use the upgrade tool to migrate the old configurations and applications to the new GlassFish Server 4.0. And then you test the new GlassFish Server installation to make sure everything works fine. And then once you're satisfied and happy that everything works fine, you modify your production environment to use the new installation. So basically what this gives you is the ability to switch back and forth between 2 versions of the application. So because of this, it is typically used for live production environments where it allows you to thoroughly test the new installation before you actually turn it on and use it in your production environment. The second upgrade path that you could use is the in-place upgrade. In contrast with the side-by-side upgrade, in-place upgrade means that the new GlassFish server release is directly installed over and into the same directory as the previous product release. So the existing configuration is basically reused in the updated installation. Performing an in-place upgrade is far easier than performing a side-by-side upgrade. But then you lose the ability to switch back and forth between the old and the new installations. And also there's no way you can revert back once you do an in-place upgrade and you get stuck in between. So because of these limitations, in-place upgrades are typically used only by developers in development environments or say by testers in their testing environment. It is intended for a non-production deployment. And an important thing to note in this is it is only possible to perform an in-place upgrade when upgrading from GlassFish Server 3 upwards. So in other words, if you're upgrading from a product version prior to 3.x, you must perform a side-by-side upgrade. So let's move on to some of the tools that can be used for upgrade. There are three sets of tools that can be used. One is the upgrade tool, which is used to perform an in-place upgrade. The other two sets are the update tool and the package utility and the software update notifier. These together are grouped and are called the update center tools. And obviously the procedure for upgrading vary depending on the tools that you decide to use. So let's look at a bit more in detail on each of these tools and how you would use them. First one is the upgrade tool. Upgrade tool, as I said, is intended solely for performing side-by-side upgrades. So what it does is migrates the configurations and the deployed applications from an earlier version of the application server to the current version. What it does not do is database migrations. So database migrations or conversions are not part of this upgrade or migration process. So what it actually does do is copies the older source domain directory to the new target domain directory, and then it calls ASAdmin start domain upgrade command, which basically does the whole upgrade for you. And then it also sends all the upgrade activities to a specific log file, which is the update.log. So when you use the upgrade tool, you're going to have a source installation and a target installation. So mostly the source server and the target server are normally installed on the same machine, but obviously under different install locations. So both the file server systems must be accessible from the system on which you perform the upgrade. And you can use this upgrade tool in two ways. You can either use it as an upgrade wizard, or if you don't like the wizard or GUI base, then you can always use it as a command line option. And to reiterate, this is the only tool available for upgrading from versions prior to 3.x. Let's look at some of the functions of this upgrade tool. So what it does is migration of deployed application. So it basically migrates your application archives, as the ER files, and the component archives, which are the jar files or the WAR files. In most scenarios, the application archives and the component archives that are deployed in the source do not require any modification to run on the new version. But then there might be some incompatibilities. So in order to overcome these incompatibilities, what you can do is you can set the compatibility property to a previous version of GlassFish so that it works straight away on your new version. But then it gives you the time to go back and fix those incompatibilities at a later stage. Some of the incompatibilities that could arise are, say, due to the stricter requirements that are imposed on the Java EE 6 and 7 as compared to the Java EE 5. Let's say, for example, an application client must not have access to EJB jar files or other jar files inside the ER file unless they use the class path header and the -list file. So incompatibilities like these can be overcome by setting certain properties one way or the other. Another thing to know is if the domain contains information of about a deployed application, and the application components does not actually say are in line with the configuration that is being used. So during the upgrade process, the configuration is migrated unchanged. The upgrade process, in other words, does not try and fix these incompatibilities. And another thing to note is that the applications and components that are deployed in the source are upgraded to the target server, but sometimes your applications do not deploy successfully on the target installation, so you have to do it manually in that case. The next function is the upgrade of clusters. So when upgrading from a clustered configuration, the old cluster information is retained in the new domain.xml file of the new 4.0 installation. But however, it is very important that you should remember that it is still necessary to go and manually recreate the server instances that were contained in the cluster. And the last function that we're going to talk about is the upgrade verification. So basically, there is an upgrade log which records the upgrade activity. So everything that is done during the upgrade process is logged into that particular log file, and any additional information is also logged into the server.log file of the upgraded domain. Once you finish the upgrade process or the migration process, you can always go to the new installation and you can run the upgrade the version command to see actually if it's been upgraded to the right version. So let's quickly look at some of the steps that's involved in using the upgrade tool. So you start off by downloading the new GlassFish Server 4 and perform a standard installation. And then you copy any custom or third-party libraries from older installation to the corresponding locations in the new installation. Please make sure that you have to copy only the third-party libraries and not the libraries that are part of the actual domain that has been upgraded. And then you run the AS upgrade command from the bin directory. And this basically takes care of your upgrade process. And then once the upgrade process is complete, you just start up the domain using the normal startup command. So next we move on to the next set of tools, which is the update tool and the package utility tool. These tools are used to perform in-place upgrade in contrast to the upgrade tool, which was used to perform the side-by-side upgrade. The GlassFish update tool is the graphical utility, and the package utility is basically the command line counterpart for the same purpose. So in addition to being used for the upgrade or migration purposes, these tools are also used for day-to-day maintenance of GlassFish server components and additional features. So for example, the update tool can be used to update the GlassFish server components, or also if you want to install additional features, such as say you want to install an OSGI admin console, you can do that using the update tool. While the package utility does not provide exactly the same set of features as an update tool, for the purposes of upgrading, which we are concerned about in this webinar, they are almost identical. So if you look at the steps that are involved in doing this upgrade using an update tool, first you'll have to stop all the domain and all the server instances that are involved in this upgrade process. You then run the either the update tool or the package utility command from the bin directory. This launches up either the GUI or the command line depending on what utility you chose. And then you select the server version that you want to upgrade to. Then you run the ASAdmin start domain upgrade command. What this basically does is kicks off the upgrade process. It starts up your domain administration server, does the upgrade, and then it shuts down the server. And once this process is completed successfully, you just start a new domain as you normally would using the start domain command. Next, we move on to the software update notifier utility. So this is very, very similar to your update utility. So what this basically does is it enables you to perform an in-place upgrade again. So the software notifier is actually distributed as a configuration option in your installation. So if you install it and you enable it, it monitors your installation, and then it pops up a notification balloon when updates or upgrades are available for your product. So all you do is wait for the pop-up. When the pop-up appears, click on the balloon, this launches the GUI. You then stop all the servers and domains, select the new server version you want to go to, run the upgrade command. This does the upgrade for you, and then you start the domain as you normally would. So those are the tools that you could use for performing an upgrade for a previous version to a current version of GlassFish server. Now let's look at some of the supported releases for this kind of migration or upgrade. So as you can see, there's a list of servers that are supported for upgrading to GlassFish Server 4.0. If you currently use a version that is not part of these supported releases, then you'll have to do a two-step upgrade process, which is first upgrade your current application version to one of those listed in these supported releases, and then from that you move to the latest version, which is 4.0. In the earlier slides, we talked about some compatibility issues that might occur when doing the upgrade. So here we quickly look at some of the issues that you might face when doing an upgrade from a previous version to the current version, and then we'll also see how we can overcome those. So all those supported releases that are listed here in this slide are binary compatible releases for GlassFish Server 4.0. The latest version also has a new default installation directory. So if you're making changes, it's very important to make note of that. And there are also some changes being done to the group management service settings. So this is the GMS is basically used for your cluster communication, heartbeats, and things like that. So the functionality basically remains the same. However, some of the settings has changed. So for example, the protocol maximum trial setting is now called maximum missed heartbeats, and the protocol timeout setting is now called heartbeat frequency. So you have to make sure that you make changes accordingly. The next couple of things, the application client interoperability and the node agent support are two things we saw earlier during the upgrade tool explanation. So this is basically compatibility with the jar files and the AR files, and if you're using a cluster configuration, then after the migration you have to make sure you go and create those instances manually. And the next one is there's no more HADB and HADBM command support. So GlassFish Server 4 supports high availability clustering by means of in-memory session state replication and active cache rather than HADB. The AS command line interface, which we spoke about earlier, is a very, very powerful command line interface. And it's got loads and loads of subcommands that you can use. In this version, there are a lot of those subcommands have been made either obsolete or have been deprecated. JavaDB, the use of JavaDB. JavaDB is the default persistent storage that is being used. And in this release, the directory location of the Java release has changed. So in order to solve this problem, you have to copy the database directory from your previous installation to the new location. And then the next one is use of persistence. The GlassFish Server 4 uses Eclipse link, whereas the earlier versions used to use stop link essentials. And now the HTTP service to network service configuration changes are maintained in the new configuration file. And last but not least, the NSS cryptographic token support is no longer available. So that basically brings us to the end of part 1, which was migrating from earlier versions of GlassFish Server to the current version. Now we move on to the part 2, which is going to be a high-level discussion of migrating to GlassFish Server from a totally different application server. So basically going to look at things that we might consider when you want to move to a new application server, and then we'll see how GlassFish Server performs in those areas, and then we'll try and compare and contrast with the other modern application servers that are available in the market. While it is a natural thing to compare and contrast the application server to other application servers in the market, sometimes it might not be that relatively straightforward. For example, it might be easier to compare GlassFish with, say, JBoss or Tomcat, but then it might not be that straightforward to compare it with WebLogic or WebSphere, because WebLogic and WebSphere are production focused, wherein all their features are about high availability, scaling, clustering, and things like that. They're not really developer-friendly application servers, whereas GlassFish is more developer-friendly. Those application servers are intended for developers to quickly try something, quickly install it, download it, try out some new features and things like that. So I will try my best to compare it to the other servers as and when appropriate. So there are certain things that you like to consider when moving on to a totally different application server is first, how easy is it to download and install? How easy it is to configure or maintain configurations? How quickly can you deploy something onto a new application server? Does it have good tools integration and support? How well does it perform? Does it have good documentation and community? How easy is it to administer? Does it have good consoles that you can administer from? And last but not least, again, is the cost. What is the cost that is involved in moving to a new application server? So let's look at these things a bit more in detail. So first, download and installation. Again, GlassFish server comes in two versions. One is the open source edition, which is free, and then you have the commercial edition, which is the Oracle GlassFish server. So it is quite easy to download. It is reasonably sized. Basically, it's last time I downloaded it's about 100 megs in size, which is not too much. It's quite easily comparable to the download of JBoss. Obviously, it's much bigger than a Tomcat installation, and also it's much smaller than a WebLogic or a WebSphere installation. When it comes to deploying and installing an application server, you don't want to be spending loads and loads of time in doing this. You just want to quickly get on with it and then start developing new features or trying out new things. So in that way, GlassFish does a reasonably good job in satisfying the users. It's quite easy to install. It's very easy to download. You can basically use the graphical installer, or you can get the archiver, just unzip it, and bam, you're ready to go. Next, we look at configuration and development and deployment. Everything that is needed to manage and maintain a GlassFish server is put into this new utility called this AS admin utility. It is even possible to manage remote servers with it, which is really, really nice feature to have. Even though it's a very, very powerful utility, the AS command has the AS admin has a lot of subcommands, so it might not be relatively easy and straightforward to use unless you know what the commands are. So you might have to spend some time scrolling through the documents, or if you have previous experience, then that could be very, very useful. So even though it's quite handy, it might not be really straightforward. And for people who are fans of XML files and you don't want to use the admin utility, you can always use the domain.xml to make configuration changes. All changes are, I would say most changes are dynamic. However, some changes do require restarts. When it comes to deployment, it does support single deployment. That is, you can deploy an application onto the cluster, or you can deploy it directly into sets of servers as and when you need it. This is, again, a very important feature to have. Like, say, for example, in the previous versions of JBoss, if you want to deploy a small application, you'll have to go to every server that hosts the application, and then you have to do it manually, which wasn't a very fun thing to do. So it's very important to have a place where you can deploy it from, so that you deploy it at one place and then it propagates to all the different instances that are being used, which is what JBoss has done in the new EAP6 release. So again, this is what all the application servers tend to have these days. And GlassFish also allows for application versioning. That is, you can have multiple versions of the same applications deployed onto the GlassFish servers. Next, we move on to tools integration and support. This is probably one of the things that is quite important, but it could easily be overlooked when making a decision for a new application server. Developers tend to like the IDEs that they are comfortable with. So it is very, very important for an application server to support the main IDEs so that they don't force the developers into using a platform that they're not comfortable with or they don't want to, just because they are moving on to that particular application server. So GlassFish again does a good job in this case. There are plugins available from all major IDEs. So you get NetBeans, which is bundled with it. You got plugins for Eclipse. It's got plugins for IntelliJ IDEA. So yeah, basically you have all the major IDEs covered there, and it also has plugins for Maven and Ant, which are quite well developed, and it's got quite nice functionalities. Another thing that could be easily overlooked and which could turn out to be quite important is the documentation and the community. If you're venturing out into a new area of going into a new application server, which you don't know much about, you're going to heavily rely on the documentation and the community. So it is very, very important that you don't, be stranded in the middle of trying to move from migrate from one application server to another because of lack of documentation. Again, GlassFish, surprisingly, for open source edition, has very good documentation. I was quite surprised to see that. It's got quite a few guides. It's got a very nice administration guide. It's got a deployment guide. It's got a performance tuning guide and various other guides. So the documentation is quite handy. And although personally I haven't used the forums or the community, but I hear they have a very, very active community. They have communities which focus on different areas, and they're quite active mailing lists too. So that could be very, very handy when you move into a totally new application server that you're not really sure about. This is a diagram from the GlassFish website, which basically shows the IDE support. So there you can see, as we discussed, it supports NetBeans, Eclipse, and IntelliJ, and some of which are co-bundled along with the GlassFish servers. Some of the other things we consider is performance. Obviously, that could be the most important thing when you move from one application to another. You obviously want your application server to perform really, really well. You want it to be scalable, readily available. You want it to be clustered, and you want the ability to load balance and things like that. Again, GlassFish covers all these aspects. It's got reasonable startup times. What they've done with GlassFish is a very, very modular approach. So basically, when you start up the server, it does not load all the components at the same time. It just loads the components that it requires. And then as and when the application needs the other components, it initializes it at that point of time. So that brings down the startup time considerably. This is very similar to what JBoss EAP 6 has done now. So the startup time in seconds, so it's like 8 seconds, 9 seconds for an application to start up, which is really, really quick. So especially if you're a developer trying out new things or you're testing something and you want to restart the server, say 50 or 100 times a day, you want the startup time to be reasonably quick. That is probably one of the negatives about, say, WebLogic or WebSphere, where it takes about roughly about 2 minutes for you to restart an application server. And then if you're doing it 100 or 50 or 100 times a day, then it could get a little painful. And it also allows for, GlassFish server also allows for clustering. So you can cluster multiple instances together. And it also allows for load balancing using an external software or hardware load balancer. It also has high availability session persistence and high availability JMS services. So it's quite good. It probably does everything that you want it to do. It does it reasonably well. Looking at some of the features of GlassFish server, new features are always nice to have. And again, each application is different. So there's no one particular application server that will probably give you all the features that your application needs. So you'll have to pick and choose the right one for you. The GlassFish, again, is a reference implementation for EE7. So it got all the new features of EE7. It's probably the only place where you can try it out right now. It's got JMS interop with WebLogic and WebSphere. It's got a nice little monitoring scripting client for custom monitoring, and also does domain administration server backup and recovery. Moving on from say performance and deployment to administration. Administration is something that you would like to have once your application goes into production. You'd want to be able to do things pretty neat. So administration is a very, very important part of an application server. And GlassFish, I have to say, does a brilliant job in this case. If you compare it with, say, JBoss or Tomcat, whose the admin consoles are not really great, GlassFish has a very powerful and very exciting administration utilities. So it has the AS admin utility, which is a command line utility that you can use to both administer and develop. And then you've got a very nice web admin console that you can do a lot of things from. It's not complex at all, and then it's got really nice extensive features. And the last thing is the cost. Again, you don't want to be spending loads and loads in an application server. If you can get a free application server to do everything that you want to do. And that is where WebLogic and WebSphere are taking a hit these days. They are proving to be quite expensive, and the other servers in the market are catching up in terms of features as to what WebLogic or WebSphere has to offer. So GlassFish, similar to other servers like, say, JBoss or Tomcat, it's got open source edition and commercial edition. The open source edition is free. You can use it for both in development and in production. And if you want extra support or quick bug fixes, then you can always opt for the commercial edition, which is the Oracle GlassFish server. Well, basically that brings us to the end of this short webinar. Here are some links that you can find more information from. You can log on to the website, which is c2b2.co.uk, and we also have a blog running, which will probably have all what we discussed in it shortly. If you want more information on the entire webinar series that we have run, you can go to the website and go to the webinar GlassFish section. And we also have a GlassFish user group, which is recently introduced, and more details can be found in the meetup.com GlassFish user group link. So thank you everybody for taking time to listen to this webinar, and have a good day.